listening to Unpause Your Life with Dr. Cali Estes and Master Coach Jenny Fontana, founders of the Life Coach Method. Each one of our uplifting and deep dive episodes is geared to help you tackle the things that hold you back from having the most magnificent life you deserve. Sit back, relax, and prepare to be coached.
Hey everybody, you are listening to Unpause Your Life, and this is Dr. Cali Estes. I am excited for my guest today. I've got Jenna James with me, and she is a passionate advocate, speaker, and social media presence dedicated to raising awareness about the dangers of fentanyl and supporting individuals on their journey to recovery. After losing her oldest son to fentanyl poisoning in 2021, she turned her grief into action working with Fentanyl Kills You, which is FKU, to educate communities and speak in schools. Her 16-year-old son, Aiden, stands beside her in spreading awareness, making advocacy a family mission. She also helps others and find careers in the addictions field through the Addictions Academy and Sober on Demand. Beyond her advocacy work, she manages social media for top recovery organizations and creates grief-focused content to support others navigating loss. At home, she finds comfort in the love for animals, sharing her space with a lively family of parrots and dogs. I'm laughing because, first of all, welcome, Jenna.
Hi.
Second of all, I'm laughing because lively doesn't describe what you have at the house. So you've got like 30 parrots and 30 dogs. Tell me about all these animals, because I see them on the videos come through and I'm like, oh my God.
So it's not quite that many, but close. I have 4 dogs and 10 parrots, and that was never the plan, at least not with the parrots. But once you own one, they just kind of come out of the woodwork. So.
I've never heard anybody say that. They've had one parrot, and next thing you know, they have like a gaggle of parrots. Like you've got
because
some of them have personality. Like I see them on there. They've got some like personality.
Once you own one, parrots, I think, are one of the most rehomed animals because they're a lot more than people expect. So once you own one, anyone who has one that needs to rehome it will call you, and I can't say no. So that's kind of how that happened.
So how does that work in the household? You have a husband and a son, and how do they take to, like, the parrots have now spilled out of one room and now they're in the living room and they've kind of like taken over the house?
So my son is really good with the parrots. He has one that adores him, and my husband just deals with it.
I love it. I love it. He's like, okay, there's another parrot. Okay. All right.
That's usually how it happens. He comes home and he's like, where'd that come from?
So he notices there's an additional one every once in a while?
Yeah, unfortunately, he notices.
Yeah. Okay. Well, tell us what you're doing with FKU. How did you get involved? What does that look like? And you have Aiden involved in helping. So tell us all about that.
Okay. Well, I guess to get to that, I kind of have to go back and tell you a little bit about myself and my son, which led into all of that. So I was a child that grew up with a mother who was an alcoholic and a drug addict. And the periods of drug use come in and out of our lives, but the alcohol was always there. And because of that and the things that I went through as a child, I was very against it and very opinionated on addiction, to the point where I wasn't a nice person when it came to others who were struggling. Thankfully, that's changed, but it took me going through it myself for that to change. And I try to think on exactly when that started, and I'm not sure. I know that after I had my second child, which is Aiden, I went through a very heavy period of depression. And because of my family history, I had always told my doctors, addiction runs in my family. I don't want to be prescribed anything that's controlled. And for the longest time, you know, up until my 30s, I stuck by that. But when my depression was getting out of hand, um, I didn't. I had a doctor recommend Ambien because I was sleeping a lot, and he thought it was my quality of sleep at night. And that was my first taste of getting high, I guess. I noticed that if I took the Ambien and didn't go to sleep right away, that my pictures would move on the wall, and I liked it. Um, and then after a while, I noticed that that was becoming a problem, and I stopped. But then I was prescribed Adderall, and that was something that just set me on fire. It gave me energy. I've always, especially with depression, I sleep a lot. And even now, to this day, I sleep a lot. That's just me. But that Adderall gave me the energy that I wanted. It made me feel happy, and I wasn't using it appropriately. And when I would run out of it, I started looking for other things, which led me to cocaine and anything that would keep me awake. So I went through a very tough time because, of course, drugs don't help depression. They do the exact opposite. I had about a 3-year period in my 30s where I was just off the rails with that addiction, and I tried to hide it from my family because I was ashamed. Eventually, my husband found out, and he sat me down and said, I know that you think the only person you're hurting right now is yourself, but you're becoming your mom and you're hurting your family. And that was a huge eye opener for me. And it set me on the path of recovery. I asked him, let me try to do this on my own. And if I can't, then we'll look into rehabs. And thankfully, it didn't get to that point. I was able to do it on my own. But that also leads me into speaking about Brandon, my son. Of course, he grew up with me and my mother. He knew the struggles. He knew that I was against drug use and heavy drinking. I myself haven't touched alcohol since 2016. And he was a great kid. He was smart. He paid attention to the things around him. He knew something was going on with me during that period. He just didn't know what. The best way to explain my son is he was gregarious and goofy, and he loved everybody. He could make a friend sitting in a waiting room at a doctor's office. He was everything that I'm not socially, because I am awkward as hell, and he was just funny and fun loving and great. A good example of just how awesome he was is while I was going through this super dark period, he was 17 years old. We got into a huge blow up fight about Wi-Fi of all things. I was mad at him for not cleaning up after himself. I changed the password to the Wi-Fi, and he moved out at 17 years old. He said, I don't know what's going on with you, but it's too much and I'm done. And he moved in with a friend at 17 years old, right around the corner. Her mother, great person, very thankful for her for taking him in during this time. But he still went to school every day. He worked a full-time job. For I think it was like 6 to 7 months that he wasn't living with me, he did everything that I would expect him to do while being at home with his parents out on his own. That's just the kind of kid he was.
So you guys grew up together, right? You had him very young, if I remember correctly.
17, right before my 18th birthday.
So he was like your other half, like your mini you, pretty much.
He was my best friend.
Yeah. So then he moved back in with you, right? After he moved out, he came back?
He came back before graduation. He came back and I got sober. During that part of my life where I was not sober, I had spent my entire career working in pharmacy. And that was no longer a safe space for me to be in. And thankfully, I realized that and I got out of it, which was a very sad decision for me because that's all I had ever known. But I couldn't be in a space with access to things when I couldn't trust myself. So I went and I worked at one job for a little while, but my son's like, why don't you come and work with me? He worked at a restaurant. He worked at Buffalo Wild Wings. And he's like, it's not permanent. It's not a big deal. Just come work with me, get yourself together and find something else. And I'm still with the company to this
That's
day.
awesome. So you made a big decision, and I heard you say it. You said it wasn't safe for me to be in this industry anymore. And that's critical in addiction because a lot of people say, well, that's all I know. I only know how to be a bartender, or I only know how to do restaurant work. I have a friend right now who keeps relapsing on alcohol. What does she do for a living? She's a bartender. And I've said 100 times, you can't bartend with your drug of choice. You can't
Right.
do that. You have to give that up. So knowing that intrinsically, that's a lot more than people know. So you somehow knew I've got to get rid of this and make this career choice. So what happens next? What's the next part of the story?
Um, so after I got sober, my son came home. Everything started getting better. The depression was better. Life in general was just better. And my son, when he turned 20, he met a girl and they wanted to live together. And so they did. They moved out, they got their own place. And then we bought the home that I'm in now, and we moved about an hour away from him. We still worked together, we still saw each other every day, still talked every day, but he was out on his own. He was doing big things and he was feeling good about himself. And then 2021 happened, and a lot of things just went downhill. Um, I'm assuming depression runs in our family, but he had a lot of events that contributed to his mental health declining. He lost his stepbrother who lived in Florida. I never realized how close they were until he passed away and the way that my son reacted. Um, he was devastated. And around the same time, I think it might have been right before the passing, he found out that his fiance was not being faithful. So, in a very short amount of time, his parents moved an hour away. His fiance, his relationship ended. He was living on his own for the very first time. He kept the apartment, she moved out. And then he lost his brother. And he was struggling mentally. We talked a lot about it. At the same time, one of his very best friends since childhood, this kid had grown up, in our home. He was struggling with addiction. He had gotten hooked on pain pills, and my son was fighting very hard to get him out of that. That's another thing that we talked about often. That child would, get into fights with his parents about it, come sleep on my son's couch, and my son would call me and be like, "What do I say to him to wake him up?" Somewhere in all of that, my son picked up the habit of the pain pills with his friend. Instead of getting him away from it, he got into it as well. And I didn't know. I had no idea. He had a job, he had his own place, he had a good amount of savings, which he didn't get that from me. I spend money like it's going out of style. um, he had a good chunk of change in the bank. And the only reason we knew is because he told us on Halloween of 2021, he had planned to come and spend the day with me and his brother and his stepdad. And he called me early in the morning and was like, "I'm bored. Can I just come now?" I'm like, "Yeah, come on over. We're not doing anything. It's probably boring here too, but come on over." 30 minutes later, I got a phone call from him and he was screaming. He slammed into the back of the truck at 45 miles per hour and totaled his car. I raced up there, picked him up. By the time I got there, the accident scene was cleared, but he hadn't calmed down. And I'm like, what is going on? Like, it's a car. We can replace it. Don't worry. And that's when he let me know that he was struggling with the beginning of an addiction. He said he started it in September. We were now in October. He said he wasn't taking them every day. I asked what he was taking. He said Percocet. And I was like, oh, okay, we can handle that. Is it good? No. Can it lead to worse things? Yes. But it's a prescription pill. It's not going to kill you. That's what I was thinking. And he's like, can I please come home? I don't want to live on my own. I'm depressed. I'm suffering. Can I just come home? And I'm like, of course. Whatever we have to do, we will get you home. We made plans that day. We broke his lease. He went and stayed with my mom for a little bit because he needed a car to use to get to work. He was still working at that time at a new job. He had just left Buffalo Wild Wings and started with a flooring company. And on November 11th, he bought his replacement car and moved into our home. I knew that he was struggling with his addiction, but I wanted to give him time to settle in. I didn't want to jump on him right away and be like, hey, what's the plan? What are we doing? I wanted to assess what was going on. I wanted to let him breathe. And that has become my biggest regret in my life because we lost him 5 days after he moved in. I'm going to try not to cry, but it's very possible that I will. So just a heads up. So in the 5 days that he was home, I didn't notice anything that made me feel like we needed to rush. His behavior was normal. He was actually extremely happy and we were laughing every day. He'd go to work, he'd come home, we'd have dinner. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary except for the night of November 15th. I noticed after we ate dinner, when he was standing in the kitchen, that he was a little wobbly. And I was like, are you okay? And he's like, yeah, I'm good, Mom. I'm just tired. I have to drive extra now for work. He worked in Charlotte. We live in South Carolina. He's like, I'm getting up earlier. I'm just tired. I'm like, okay. We watched a whole bunch of videos that night, animal videos. That's how I reduce stress. And he joined me, him and his brother. Then him and his dad went upstairs. They played video games for a couple hours. They're both really big into gaming. I kissed him goodnight at 10 o'clock. I went to bed. His dad kissed him goodnight between 12 and 1. He went to bed. And everything was normal. It felt good to have my kid in my house. The next morning is when everything fell apart. My son Aiden got up and went to school. My husband got up and went to work, not knowing what was waiting for me when I woke up. I had to be to work at noon that day. I had just accepted a position as a manager at Buffalo Wild Wings. That's another reason why my son had found a new job. We couldn't work together after that. And I was feeding my animals. My bird room is in the front of my house and it faces the driveway. And my son had parked his new car behind my car. My car was in the garage. So as I'm feeding the birds, I look out and I see that his car's still in the driveway and he should be at work. The first thing that I thought was, oh crap, you're being irresponsible. This is not like you. You've been so good. I was frustrated. I was aggravated. I kind of stomped up the stairs. And when I got to his door, I knocked on it. And normally he'll yell something grouchily at me, like, what? I'm up or something. And I didn't hear anything. When I opened the door, I saw my son's feet. And when I came around the corner, he was laying next to his bed And I knew right away that he was gone. Your mind tries to tell you it's not real, but he had been in the position that he was in for a few hours. I later found out they think he died between 1:30 and 2 a.m. But where I could see his arm, I could see the lividity, the blood had settled. So it looked like big purple welts. His eyes were closed, but he had blood trickling out of his nose and he had foam on his lips. And I just remember screaming. It was almost like a howl. I didn't have my phone on me, and my first thought was, I need to get 911. I need to get help here. Even though I knew that it was too late, I was praying that it wasn't. I don't remember going down the stairs, but by the time I hit the bottom, my dogs were cowering, like they were terrified of the sounds that were coming from me. I got my phone. I called. I don't know how she understood anything that I said, because it was just a screaming, jumbled mess. She asked me to come back upstairs and to check him. And when I tried to pull the arm that was across his chest up, I felt it was like ice. I didn't know what had happened. I didn't know if it was the Percocet. Those don't kill you normally unless you take an insane amount. I didn't know if he had heart failure. I know he was young, but just all these things go through your mind. I had to put my dogs outside to let the ambulance in. And when they got to the room, they didn't even touch him. They just looked at him and they're like, I'm sorry, ma'am. There's nothing we can do. We've got to get a coroner in here. I called his father in Florida, who couldn't understand me for the first minute to 2 minutes of me screaming in the phone. And then when it finally hit, I knew, because he started screaming. I'll never forget that. My husband said the same thing. He didn't know. He just hung up and came home. And by the time that he arrived, there were sheriffs everywhere and a coroner. So he knew it was bad. Yeah, sorry.
You've got me crying, and I'm supposed to be the professional that doesn't ever cry.
I cry every time, so I knew it was coming. We didn't know right away, but the coroner said to us before leaving the house, we think it's fentanyl. We can't say that for sure until toxicology comes back, but we're seeing this every day. My son was one of 107 fentanyl deaths in our county alone in 2021. And that was November. February 2nd was when we got the confirmation that he had fentanyl in his system. No Percocet. The only other thing in his system was caffeine and Delta 9 from his vape, but there was no other pain pill. So after that, my husband's biggest worry was that I was going to relapse. And I was a little scared about it too, myself. But if I'm 100% honest, I didn't really feel any urge for that. I just felt not wanting to be here. I don't tell many people this story, but I searched this room for fentanyl after my son passed. I checked in every pocket of every shirt hanging under the mattress because I wanted to go too. I wanted to go where my kid was. That's how devastating that loss was for me. And thankfully, whatever he had, he took that night. There was nothing in here. But I also have a family and another son that I have to live for. And that got me moving. I had a chance encounter at the restaurant with a mom wearing a shirt that says fentanyl kills you, talk about it. I just happened to be waiting on her table and I was like, hey, can we talk about your shirt? And she was the founder of FKU. It was just in the beginning stages at that point. I think there were 3 moms involved. And I met up with them. We started standing on street corners holding signs saying, this is happening in our community. You need to be aware of it and active against it. And that just kind of took off. There's a couple hundred moms in it now. We speak at high schools. We still do community events. And then I found my voice through TikTok, of all places. I started it honestly to be about my dog. I adopted November after my son passed, which is my Doberman, my best friend. And within a week, my videos went from showing off my dog to talking about my grief. And the people that responded to that kept me going. It gave me comfort when I needed it. And they said it gave them comfort. And it just kind of exploded from there.
Wow. Okay. So there's a couple things I want to talk about in this whole story.
Okay.
So the first one is I want to talk about when Bam moved home in that 5-day window. Do you feel guilty for not saying, let's go to rehab, let's get off of what you're on, for being more diligent and losing him? Do you have that guilt?
Oh, 100%. We're just over 3 years later, and it's starting to dissipate a little bit. I'm working on that. But in the very beginning, that was all I thought about, was it was my fault because I didn't act quick enough.
It wouldn't have mattered if you did or didn't. Because with fentanyl, and that's what my husband microdosed for 10 years. He did straight fentanyl. So he went from oxy to roxy to Dilaudid to morphine to heroin to fentanyl. That was his drug of choice. So even if you would have intervened and said, okay, we're going to go to treatment, they would have treated for Percocet, not fentanyl, because they didn't know it was fentanyl. So he would have had the detox of fentanyl and probably came out and maybe tried something again. So a lot of parents blame themselves for not doing more or doing enough, but you don't know what you don't know, right? So you didn't
Right.
know it was fentanyl. You knew it was Percocet, and he thought it was Percocet because that's what he thought he was taking. So that's the first thing. With the moms you meet, do you find that common, that they don't know enough about the drugs that the children are taking? Are they given wrong information? Do you see that happen?
Yes and no. I see both sides of the spectrum. We have like a mother who just lost a 16-year-old that wanted to take something for a test or stress that he was dealing with for that test, and it was fentanyl, and he passed. And then I have other mothers whose children were, 5, 10, 15 years into their addiction. They knew what they were taking. So both sides, covers both sides.
And do you see that the moms still blame themselves either way?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's pretty common. And what I learned jumping onto social media, a lot of people will blame you too. So, I mean, it's hard enough that we blame ourselves, but I get comments like, well, you should have done a better job raising them and that wouldn't have happened. Or teach your kids not to do drugs and you won't be crying. Just stupid, hateful things. And my response usually is, I say that to myself all the time. I don't need you to tell me that.
Those comments I always find interesting because I recently had somebody come for me that posted on 17 different posts of mine that said, well, you killed your husband. Because I knew he was, using fentanyl, but I had done everything to get him sober. And the bottom line is you can do everything right, and it still doesn't matter. You could have done everything right, put him in rehab, and he came out, maybe took one pill, and we'd be right here. So it's not that you did anything wrong, but people look at it from an outside perspective and say, well, if you just did this better. And I always say, if you don't have an experience with addiction or loss, you will always judge somebody else until it's in your backyard. And then you're like,
Mhm.
oh, now it's a whole different ballgame. What is it like now? So I see that all the time on social media, and I call them keyboard commandos. They would never say that to your face in person, but behind the keyboard, they feel safe until
Yeah.
you call them out. And I love to see when you grab their post and put it up, and you're like, well, let me explain this to you. And then it's
Yeah.
fun to watch because you have a little group around you. You have a little village, and the little village goes to their page, and they get slaughtered, for lack of a better term. And I love to see that because they're getting educated and they're getting almost put in their place. This is not appropriate to say, and this is not how we handle it. This is what we do instead. You know,
Yeah.
and it's interesting because you're taking this platform now and you're educating, but you're doing it through grief. So tell me about that. Tell me how you've been able to deal with everything using social media as a positive and not a negative.
Well, it hasn't always been a positive. I'm a very sensitive person and I get my feelings hurt pretty easily. So I've had to learn to let go of that and, like you just said, see it for what it is and not take it the way that I do. Um, I had no idea when I started doing it that it was going to become such a positive in my life and other people's lives. I get a lot of people that'll say, your content helps me feel less alone. Helps me feel less crazy. And they don't realize that when I post it and they respond to it, they're doing the exact same thing for me because that was a thought in my head that made me feel crazy. And by them sharing that they feel the same way, it's almost like we've become like this tribe of, I hate the word healing because I don't feel like I'm ever going to be whole again, but I can't think of another one. I feel like we help each other heal or towards the goal of eventually getting there, whether we do or not.
That's interesting you said that because a lot of people say you should be in therapy. By 3 years, by now, your son is, moved on. You should be back to normal, right? Why are you not normal? Why are you not productive? Why are your videos still crying? Why are you in the front lawn? I saw your little flag. Why are you in the front lawn playing with your little flag? Why have you not fixed this problem? That's what I hear. And I get the same thing because, well, I didn't lose a child, so it's a little different. I lost a husband, but it's 2 years down the road and people say, well, you should be doing this or you should be doing that or you're dating too soon or like there's always a timeline that other people have on grief. And what I like is you kind of went, F you on the timeline. I'm going to do what I need to do, how I need to do it, and the people that need to find me will. And if you don't want my content or don't need to be here, move on, which
Yeah,
is
scroll
nice.
on. It's not for you.
Yeah, and you've created this little group, which I like because I could see, and there's so many moms on there that are talking 10 years down the road. I mean, if you lose a child, the pain doesn't stop. That's the bottom line. It's always going to be there. You're going to have good days, you're going to have bad days, and it's okay to grieve, and it's okay to grieve on social media. And that's okay because you used it as a platform to help other people. So I commend you for that because that's hard. You put your
Thank you.
soul out there every day and say, this is what I'm going through. It's a tough day today. And then, you have great days, until the bird pecks an eye out for somebody. And then that's going to be the social media. But it's such a nice thing to see. And I know a lot of people come at you for doing it, say you should already be in therapy. You should be a certain point. And the truth is you're not. And you may never get to that point, and that's okay.
Right.
So
And what I've discovered and what I like to tell people is you always hear time heals all things, but they don't say what amount of time. And for me, with losing a child, I think it's going to be a lifetime. I will grieve him for the amount of time that I would have loved him forever till my last day on earth. So putting a timeline on something so huge just doesn't make sense to me.
well, not only that, but you guys grew up together. You had him young. You had him as a teenager. He's been a part of you for more of your life than
Yep.
less of your life. So it's like he's there, he's there, he's there, he's not. and that's a whole new experience. It's not like you can go, let me just send a text message, or, hey, let me call you with this video. It just stops. And I
Yeah.
think people forget that because it's so different. Most people who have a child who've been using drugs for 10 years wait for that call. Like, I knew that call was coming at some point with my husband because he had crashed 14 cars. He had 5 overdoses. I had 4 cop calls, and I thought all 4 were DOA. Most of them were, come pick up your husband. He's drunk. Come pick up your husband. He crashed the car. Come pick up your husband. He was found with fentanyl. Why can't you arrest him? No, come get him. Okay. So when that call came, it wasn't unexpected. Whereas your finding was extremely unexpected. He had been there for 5 days. You knew there was a problem. You were addressing the problem. Everything was going a certain direction, and it was completely unexpected. So that's a completely different type of loss than, say, a mom who's seen her child in jail, seen their child in rehab, seen their child crash the car repeatedly, and they're going, at some point, this is happening. And then it happens. It doesn't make the grief any less, but there's an expectation of this could happen, which is completely different. So your loss was completely different. And then, you've got his dad in a different state. His stepdad's here. So it's not like you've got just one family. Now you've got 2 families that are dealing with everything. And it makes it even harder because there's more blame and there's more accusations and there's more, well, maybe I should have done more because now I've let down a whole second family. Tell me I'm wrong.
No, you're not wrong.
Yeah. So then there's more to it. So now you've got all of this, and it's like, okay. And then well, I don't want to be here. Totally normal. Because there's, why couldn't I stop it? Why didn't I do something different? And if I'm not here, I don't have to deal with it. But then you're going, well, if I'm not here, I have another child that's going to mourn me. Now I'm causing more harm. So then it's like,
Exactly.
well, I'll take the pain of all of this so you don't have to deal with it. So that's a lot. And that's mom guilt. And we don't talk about that ever. Like, you don't see podcasts on mom guilt, all of the things you had to endure. You're there with him. You raised him hands on. And the expectation from other outside influences that you could have, should have done a better job is always going to be there in your head. So how do you get past that? How do you put the noise out of your head now?
So with a lot of things, I always go, well, what would Bam say? What would Bam think? And I know exactly what he'd say. I probably can't use those words on here.
Yes,
but
you can. We're an explicit podcast, so go
he would
ahead.
say, fuck them. Fuck them, Mom. Who gives a shit what they think? I know, like in the case where he got it from his friend, I didn't talk about that part, but it was something that his friend went and picked up, and then he went and met the friend and got it. At first, I was angry at the friend. I was like, oh my God, you killed my child. I hate you. I'm so angry at you. You can't come to the funeral. You just stay the hell away from us. And then I heard my son say, it's not his fault, Mom. He didn't know. I chose. And it took me, I think it was about 3 or 4 months before I reached out to that friend and said, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for the way that I treated you. I'm sorry for banning you from the funeral. If you feel comfortable and would like to, you can come to my home. You can come up to my son's room. You can say your goodbyes. And if you want, you can take some ashes home with you. And he did. He did. I get a lot of shit for that too. People say to me, like, how could you not blame him? And then other people say, they get mad at me for the small point of time where I did. I had to do what I felt was best for me, what was best for my son. And my son was a very responsible kid. He would take responsibility for his choices. But he was also the kind of kid where whatever I was struggling with, he'd be like, Mom, you got this. You're better than that. Don't worry about what people say. And that's just the focus I take with me nowadays, wherever I go, whatever I do. I just remember what my kid would say to me. He was always a cheerleader. So he was a cheerleader for his dad. He was a cheerleader for his brother. He was your biggest fan. So that's what gets me through it. I may have rambled. Did I answer that question?
You did. And it's interesting because it was his friend's drug supply that he got on. So his friend has guilt we haven't even talked about, which is guilt of getting him addicted. And I remember the first, 'cause my husband was an uppers guy. He was a cokehead. And I'm an uppers girl. So when we met, we were both in recovery. It worked really well. He was not a downers guy. He never did downers. And his friend gave him an oxy. That's how it went. And I remember his friend's name was John, and he was a plumber. And he said to him, I am so sorry for getting you hooked on this. I feel horrible. And I remember he had guilt for that. And I remember being mad as hell. I was like, why would you do that? Why? But my husband always said the same thing Bam said. I made that choice. I picked it up. I can put it down, but I can't put it down. I'm addicted to it. So it's hard when it's not, just a random street dealer that he got it from to just hate. It's actually somebody who was a friend of his that somehow they ended up using together. It's hard. And a lot of people don't realize that. They don't realize these guys were friends. And Bam was trying to get him sober when this all went sideways.
Yeah.
Now, where is that kid now? Is he still using? Is he still alive?
He's sober. And I think that has also contributed to healing for me because it could have went one of two ways. He wakes up one morning, the thing that he gave his friend took his friend's life. Not his fault, but that's how he was thinking. He could go down deeper into addiction. He could die, or he could wake up and get sober. And that's what he did. We went out in December, this past December, for Bam's birthday, and we were able to talk a little bit. And he apologized. He said, I never intended for what happened to happen. I loved him. And I know he did. I have my son's phone. What leaded me to that point of forgiveness, or what led me, was going through the phone. Because I was looking through it, I wanted to find everything I could. I wanted to see if the addiction went deeper than September, the date that he had given me. So I searched through everything. It started in September, but what I saw was the deep conversations between the two about the addiction, what it was doing to the friend's life, why Bam wanted him to get better, and then eventually to them both discussing what they were going to do as friends and as boys, to make each other better and hold each other accountable. And unfortunately, it didn't get to that point before one of them passed away. But I saw the bond that they had. You see friendships all the time, but you don't see it from that perspective, the inside perspective. And that was given to me by that phone.
That's interesting. That's almost healing because you get to see, a lot of people don't get that. And they say, well, I don't really know what happened, or what if it went on longer, or what really happened. And you get to see all those messages. So that's kind of also some closure for you, which is nice.
Yeah, I needed it.
So what would you say to parents that are struggling with a kid that's using? What kind of advice would you give now?
So we talked about what I regretted earlier, but let's talk about what I don't regret. I don't regret bringing him home when he told me that. I don't regret surrounding him with family and love. Had he said, hey, I want to come home, I'm struggling with a pill addiction, and I went, oh, no, I don't want that in my house. I'm so disappointed in you, so disgusted. So you fix your crap and then you can come home. I wouldn't have survived his death. That was never a thought in my mind, but I do see that very often. And I want to say boundaries are important. So I'm not saying that you shouldn't tell somebody in the depths of addiction, no, you can't come home, or, this is the boundaries that I have to place. Like, I'm not giving you money. I'm not doing this. I think those are important for your safety and depending on your situation. I think where we were at in the beginning of addiction, that what I did was fair to him, to us. But I have no regrets because I know the last 5 days of his life were really, really, really good ones. He had his mom, he had his brother, he had his dad, he had a home, and he died where he felt loved and safe, even though unfortunately, because of fentanyl, he wasn't. My recommendation is to love them through it, however that looks for you. Even if you have to set boundaries where they can't live with you, that connection, that knowing that they're worthy of your love and your trust. Trust depends on many things, but just knowing that they're worthy of what you're giving them. I see a lot of parents turn their backs, and that saddens me. If I had done that, I wouldn't be here today.
I talk a lot about that when I'm teaching, especially in our family coaching class. With the instinct is that's a you problem. Don't bring that into my house. I have other kids. I have a husband. I have things I have to do. I don't want to deal with that. Or how could you destroy this family? Or look what you're doing to me. And that just makes things worse. Instead of, because the drugs aren't the problem, they're a solution to a problem. They were BAM's solution to my brother overdosed in Florida. My girlfriend, who fiance, got caught cheating. I have my own apartment for the first time. Now I'm alone. That was his solution. How do I cope with all of these feelings? And there was so much going on. So the drugs weren't his problem. It was his solution. And instead of parents saying, okay, let's talk about the problem, they address the drug as the problem. And we see that in society because treatment centers say the drug is your problem. Come here, get off drugs. Well, that's great, but we're not solving any of the problems. So that's very common. So it's tough, I think, as parents and tough as outsiders to make judgment, to pass judgment on what we should and shouldn't do. So I love that advice for parents. That's awesome. We're out of time. So I want to thank you for coming on the show. I want to thank you for your story. How can people find FKU? How can they find resources? How can they find you?
So FKU, we have our own website. It is fentanylkills and the letter U, not YOU.org. You can sign up for the newsletter to know what we're doing and just be updated, stay informed. We also have a shop that all the proceeds go to helping us with the website, with all the work that we do out in the field, because unfortunately that costs money. And then you can find me on TikTok at November_BAM, and Facebook and Instagram is Facebook's Jenna James and Instagram is I am Jenna James.
And we'll put all that up in the show notes so that you can reach Jenna. So I want to thank you for coming on the show, and you have been listening to Unpause Your Life with Dr. Cali Estes.
Thank you for listening to Unpause Your Life with Dr. Cali Estes and Master Coach Jenny Fontana. Head over to www.thelifecoachmethod.com to learn more about coaching yourself and how to become a master coach.